Hello, and this is the statistics feature in Humanagement. So this is a very robust feature, but it can also be extremely simple. It's entirely up to you how complex or how simple you want to leave this feature, but it is flexible and can cover a lot of ground. So in its base, you can create a stat. So let's say you want to keep track of something like number of. You can choose if you want to keep that stat weekly, daily, monthly, or yearly. Now, just using this form, you can go ahead and create that stat. It'll show up right here. You can then add values to it. So you could say, I made this many calls this week because I'm keeping this as a weekly stat. And this will automatically go and get you your end of your current week. Now, you can also choose any other time in that week. I have this company set as the week ending on Sunday. However, if I wanted to, I could jump over into my settings area and then I can edit things like the days that I work in the week or the days that the company is open. I can change my week ending. So now I'm jumping back to stats, looking for that cold call stat. Now see that it is for the 13th. It also automatically adjusted that previous value because that week ending has changed. And so now it's changed that to that Friday instead of to that Sunday from that same week. So it'll change as you go. So you never need to worry about adjusting information if you change your week ending or when you want to enter your stats for the week. So I can also select the next week, right? It only lets me select that week ending because it's a weekly stat. And then it's giving me some colors and some options into that stat. So this is a really simple but extremely powerful way for you to keep track of information in your company. Employees can keep track of different types of numbers like cold calls, sales, support requests, number of boxes ordered, number of boxes shipped, employees hired, number of employees, all sorts of data can be kept track of manually, which isn't available in a established system. So that automatically brings a lot of value because keeping track of employees' production can be paramount to how much they're being paid, whether it's worth to keep them around, and how well your company is doing. So it has some automatic colorization in here. As you're changing these values, it's going to be having up be green and have down be red. And then there's some customizations, a lot of customizations that can go in further than this. But if you just want to use it for this, it is that simple. Just go create the stat, add the values. If you want to edit any of them, you can just edit it in here. You can see it's updated automatically. You can also bulk import values if you're going from another system or have that data elsewhere. So next, you can take this to the next level and you can go into your settings area. So your settings area has a lot of different options here. You can also access these same options when you're creating a new stat by pressing the advanced options, and you'll see all these options as well. But to keep it simple, it usually just loads with that. So here's all the advanced options. You have the stat name. You can change that anytime. You can have the stat owner, which employee is responsible for it. This is also what will show up in their My Stats, which is the default filter for each employee. You also have the division. It'll automatically grab the division of the employee when you select it. All these employees are in the executive division, but it would be changing if they were in different divisions. So you can also change this to any other division. You're not stuck with the division for that employee, as sometimes that is something that needs to be changed. You can set the start date. So this is what's expected to be the first date. This interacts with some other features. So it can be useful or you can ignore it. And this shows you the last date it was updated. This will be the last value that's shown in that graph. And that can also be useful for knowing if you're having a weekly meeting or something, if the employees have updated their stat already. So you also have a stat description, so you can go ahead and say how people should enter it, where they get data from. Enter. Add a suffix or a prefix. So let's say I want to make this money, or I want to say colors. This will now see and change the way that that's displayed. So you can use whatever formats you want there. You can also change it from weekly to daily to monthly. So one thing that's really cool about this is when you change it from this, it doesn't matter how the data was entered in there. For the graph, it will reevaluate and recreate this data. So if I click on daily here, it's converting everything over. Now, one thing that's really powerful with this too is we'll actually do some pretty complex math because weeks don't go directly into months or months don't go directly into weeks. So if you're converting something over, instead of just combining it by the week ending, it's actually going to be breaking down weeks into the days and then combining for the month. So it's actually extremely accurate on exactly what each of those months would have had it been entered monthly or daily or weekly, etc. So additionally, you can also set this to manual entry, which is what we're showing. You can also do calculating. So if you want to use different stats and create new math with them together, like gross income, and then say plus another stat like let's see, number of calls out divided by any other stat. You can also divide by numbers or do any other math with numbers. So you can come up with very, very powerful metrics without having to enter them manually based upon your manual stats. So that can also be extremely powerful. Now you can also do external. So if you want to connect this up with Zapier, you can then get lots of automatic stats. And I'll get to that in a minute. So if I just have this as a manual stat, I also have this viability line area. Now what this viability line area will do is I can put a number like 50, right? And so that will then display on this graph showing what is the weekly expectations for that stat. Now, why that's powerful is it will actually allow you to see on here what people should be doing. You can set their general target that way. Now, you can also make this an up and down graph, right? Which is the red is down and the green is up. Also, even is down, as things should be going up generally. You can also do inverted. So now this is showing, right, the number is going up, but it's showing it as a negative, and this number is going down, but showing it as a positive for something like a number of tickets created or a number of bugs found. You can also change this to a range. So now it's going to change the way that it's using the entry method. And so now it's changed color, where even though this is up, it's still considered down because it is below this range threshold. So for a stat like where you don't really care how many they make over, but you do say if they didn't make at least 5 calls, then it's considered negative. You can also plot it that way, which can be very useful. To get rid of the viability line, just set it to 0. And it disappears. You can also do negative numbers for this too, in case it's a inverted stat or for whatever reason. And you can do tags. So tags can be really useful for grouping. So if I wanted to say, let's go over here and have some gross income stats. I'm actually gonna get rid of that filter and just put gross. So I could search for gross and get all my gross income stats. Or if I just wanted these two, because they're just gross income, not any of these other ones, then I could go over here and I could say gross income. Save it. And then I can go and you can see it here. The tag has been added. So I also go to this one. You can have unlimited number of tags on any one stat. You just create them very easily. So now I have 2 gross income stats. So if I go over into the filter and I filter gross income, now I'm only going to see those stats. Get rid of that. And so you can create whatever kind of tags or folders, if you will, that you want, which also makes that extremely powerful. So this is basically all the features, the main features. The other one we have here is primary. So if you look on your dashboard, you're going to see some stats. So these are only the stats that are assigned to that employee as the owner. Now, what shows here is the primary stat of that employee. So each employee can have one primary stat that shows here nice and big so that they understand this is the main thing they should be paying attention to. And then, of course, all the other graphs can be there and they can add values and view tables and manipulate them from there as well. So going back to statistics, and see it saves your last entry, so you don't have to worry about continually to get to that information. So going a little bit further, we can also do auto scale. So this is determining the way that that graph is scaled. So it's either scaled, well, this has a lot of zeros. So let's say this one here. If I wanted to take this value, let's see, the 4th of October, I'm going to change it to, let's say, something bigger. So now this doesn't have any values. So the scaling of it, if I turn off auto scale, let's see, that's a little too close to it. So there's some auto scaling kind of features natively in here. And all this is basically doing is to change the way that it's dealing with some of this information. Obviously, it depends greatly on the type of data that you have in there. There we go. So see now the bottom of that, it does some rounding, but basically the bottom of that graph will be the lowest number instead of 0, depending on whether or not auto scale is active. You can also use sum and average. So what sum and average does is it controls whether or not when you're combining dates. So I showed you a little bit earlier about how you can change the stat from being weekly to monthly in the settings. And that's like what this stat is and how it's going to deal with data that you're entering into it. Now, if you want to just see like, okay, well, where I'm at, for the month, or let me just view this data yearly, you can always click the button there. This isn't going to change the way that it enters or anything. It's still going to be, like a weekly stat, but what it is going to do is it's going to change the way that all of the stats display. So when you're adding, right, you can choose to either average it for all the periods inside, all the weeks inside, or you can have them combine. Now there's different situations where it's useful. So right now it's on average. It's giving me the average value for each of those periods. And then you can do it like this, and it's going to be adding them up in those periods. So that's just some stuff that's more powerful for that. So then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at this data based on its period. So we can do custom range. So a custom range will do, let's go to this Bobby one, right? It has more data. So we can look at some past dates and we can select any sort of range we want to see and we can manipulate and kind of play with that data as well, right? So if we then go with this, we can start interacting with it with some of these other buttons here. So for instance, if we want to compare a range, we can compare one range to another. And you can see the data overlaying each other. And so you can see this period compared to this period, and you can really get granular in understanding where your company's at from one date to the other. So you can start very simply by just having someone keep track of data, but you can then later get into analyzing it as you have more data. You can also compare stats. So if I wanted to look at this stat, if these two stats have the same type of data, right? If you're keeping them both weekly, obviously it's the test account, then you can click on two different stats and you'll be able to see how those two stats stack up against each other. So here's two stats, and you can see this data is so much less than the other stat that it's not really showing a good comparison. So you can click this different range one that popped up. So then you can see how that data actually stacks up against on this scale and on that scale separately. You can also choose to accumulate the values. So if I'm looking at one particular area, I can also see it accumulate on this side, so I can see where I'm at for that quarter or that month or that week or whatever else. I can also choose to show the labels on it, and I can also have some custom sorting options. So I can sort by whether the stat is up or down or how much, the name, the division, etc. And just jumping back in here, we also have generate zero. So what this does is this will choose whether or not we're generating numbers for empty periods. So in this stat, turn off this. So in this stat, we can see the periods here. And then if we turn on generate zero, you can see as it's now generating these periods for all the blank periods where there wasn't valid data. If we turn it off, it stops generating that. So that can be useful if you have a stat that's often zero and you don't want to enter it. Or you can have it off if you want things to be more exact, and you can also make it a private stat. And so making a stat private means that only the person who is the owner of it or a stat admin in the settings area will be able to control it. So that's basically how all these different functions work inside of stats, so you can get the data and play with it as you so desire. And there you go. So that's all that data.